coming in, so we're going to go ahead and give them maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and start. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Allsbridge. I'm Brady Weaver. It's my pleasure to present this webinar to you today, together with Dennis Winkler and Michael Fullwood. Before we continue, we'd like to invite your active participation throughout the session. Right now, I have everyone on mute. However, throughout the presentation, we'll be monitoring questions in the chat box, where you can enter your questions or comments throughout the session. During the duration of the e-seminar, we'll be polling you to see whether you believe a particular practice is best practice or BS. Following each poll, we'll invite you to submit any questions you may have via the question box on your screen. The session is being recorded. Will be made available to you within the next day or so on sourcingleadership.com. I expect to see an email with the link. Our discussion today will be led by Allsbridge Senior Director Dennis Winkler and Allsbridge Director Michael Fullwood. Dennis Winkler has 20 years of experience as a global outsourcing leader across a myriad of industries. As VP of Finance at Balcor, in the early 1990s, he ran the Financial Reporting Shared Service Center and led the outsourcing strategy from the corporate perspective. As President and COO of RSM McGladrey Financial Process Outsourcing through 2005, he worked with clients on their outsourcing strategy from the provider perspective. Now as Allsbridge's Business Process Services leader, Dennis works with Fortune 500 and mid-sized companies to develop their sourcing strategy and successfully execute this with an outsourcing provider and or build a global shared service organization. Dennis has set up outsourcing relationships covering every BPO function on virtually every continent. Michael Fullwood is a recognized leader in strategic deal making with over 20 years of demonstrated experience, particularly with complex sourcing initiatives covering North America, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. He is specialized in strategy assessment, sourcing advisement, and contract negotiations for multiple industries, towers, and functions across both ITO and BPO, with a specialization in finance and accounting and procurement and strategic sourcing. Michael has become accomplished in sourcing and contract renegotiation. He has also authored several white papers, and prior to joining Allsbridge, Michael worked with TPI, now ISG, and with OPI, now EXL. With that being said, and with no further ado, why don't you go ahead and take it away, Dennis.
Thanks, Brady. Hello, everyone. Today's topic is about best practices. So over time, there's been many outsourcing best practices that everyone would agree would be true. However, as the market has been maturing, our position on some of these best practices have changed and flipped. So what we're looking to do today is have a highly interactive session on what's truly still a best practice and what's BS. So our format is we're going to present a BPO article or some media posting that is allegedly a best practice, and we'll ask the audience to vote for their point of view on whether this is truly a best practice or if it's not a best practice, i.e. if it's BS. We'll show you the audience results. We'll give you our point of view on whether it's a best practice or not, and we'll take questions and comments via the chat box. That way, and we'll answer any questions you have and let you voice any contrary opinions you might have as part of the discussion and debate. So that's the format. So here we go with topic number one. The best practice theory on how you should outsource has been that you would start with very low-level processes and over time source more processes along some sort of sourcing hierarchy curve. So, this example is for finance and accounting. So often people would start with low-hanging fruit like accounts payable and do a SOW for that, and then over time start to move some of the collections, maybe some of the GL work, and maybe at some point in their maturity they get to FP&A, maybe not. The same type of sourcing hierarchy exists in ITO. It exists in other back office processes like insurance, where you might start with policyholder services as low-hanging fruit, and maybe you do some of the claims and call center work. And if you're really mature, maybe you look at something like actuarial services. So our first poll, or our first question then is related to this one. So our question is, our poll's open on this one. Does the audience think that the sourcing hierarchy is still a best practice of how you should source, or if you think it's yes? And just so folks know, we've got close to 100 attendees, so we've got about 75% of the votes in, and I'll close this poll in another couple seconds here. So any last votes? Okay, so on our first one, our results show that we have 52% of the audience saying this is still the best practice, and 48% saying it's BS. My point of view is that the provider market has grown so much in their capabilities and capacities that this theory no longer holds. It may have been true a decade ago, that the outsourcing market couldn't take on some of the higher level processes, but I would suggest that best practice these days is that companies should look at an overall sourcing strategy at one time up front that would encompass all of their functions and look to source a higher percentage than what had been best practices a decade ago when this theory was first come up with. I think you get better results. There's less handoffs. There's more accountability with the provider taking on the additional responsibilities. There's less pain of internally with your staff of sourcing new processes every year or two, and you know, the unrest that causes in an organization. So I think as far as transition plan, you still might want to go. You might want to start your transition with some of the less complex processes, and then transition some of the higher level, more complex processes in the later waves of transition. But I think you get better results by doing a more enterprise-wide, all-encompassing sourcing strategy as opposed to going function by function by function. So you know, again, if there's any comments, questions, thoughts on this, you know, please pop them up in the chat box. And if not, we'll move on to our next process.
Okay. I think we're ready to go to the next screen there. So I think we're one too many there. I think we got one. We went over one. Yeah, there we go. So the next one is around LATAM, and the question is, LATAM has, or the statement is, LATAM has more and often has more to offer in terms of service offerings than India or the Philippines right now. So, and this is not, as Dennis pointed out, this is really just best practice that we hear in the marketplace. This is not specific to any one individual or individuals. But the question is, or the statement once again, LATAM has more to offer than India or Philippines when it comes to outsourcing. So given that statement, the polls are open and you can place your votes.
We've got about 60% of the audience votes in so far. This one looks to be a little less close than the first one was.
Yeah, I would expect this one a little bit as well, a little bit less.
Okay, I'm going to close this one out.
Okay, so it looks like, as I pretty much suspected, most of you believe that this is not true, that this is really BS, the fact that LATAM has more to offer than both India and Philippines is bogus. And our point of view on something like that is exactly that. It's not a knock on LATAM. I think LATAM has a lot to offer, particularly when you talk about some of the customer care and even to some degree document management type capabilities. There's a lot that takes place in LATAM, Guatemala and Mexico, Costa Rica, and some of those other countries that are more or less Central American countries. They have capabilities that have begun to scale up a great deal, but still, when you compare it to India particularly, India is deeper, India is broader, India has really much stronger capabilities in almost all the areas than LATAM has. Once again, this doesn't mean LATAM is not growing and will not one day get to a level where it competes more competitively with India. But even right now, I think you'll find it not only behind the Philippines, probably also behind Eastern Europe when it comes to the depth and breadth of capabilities. One of the other comments I would make about this is that when you talk about actually sourcing in LATAM, there are a number of geopolitical and regulatory risks that are also associated with that. And we'll talk a little bit about geopolitical risks a little bit later as well. But these types of risks also introduce contracting difficulties. that are still in kind of an early phase right now, still haven't matured in terms of how we mitigate those risks. So there's still capabilities there. We're seeing contracts in Latin America, particularly for some of the Latin American companies, or for U.S. and European countries that have presence in Latin America, but it certainly does not necessarily compete with what we see in India in terms of depth and breadth. Questions, comments, any questions about this at all?
Yeah, a quick comment, Michael. You know, I agree that, you know, LATAM really is a great nearshore option for people, and it's a part of a global sourcing strategy that companies should have. It's just probably not the main part of the strategy that companies should have.
Yep, actually, I think that's a very good point, Dennis. The fact that with multi-shoring becoming more prevalent right now, we're seeing companies and clients actually put the right functions in Latin America and some of the other more strategic functions in a more strategic place. So, good point.
And this is Michael. We've got a question. What are the key inhibitors that LATAM is facing to grow their outsourcing capabilities? Political risk, intercountry taxation issues, labor laws, etc. You mentioned geopolitical risk. How about other factors?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you just named a lot of the factors that are really inhibiting LATAM from growing so much. I mean, just the regulatory risk. I mean, LATAM, first of all, is an extremely manual region. A lot of things are being done manually. They still use a lot of the requirements for documents not to be outside of the walls of the various countries. There are issues with transferring money, getting money in and out of the country, particularly in countries like Venezuela and Argentina. In Venezuela, for example, right now there's a little bit of civil unrest, although that is not in and of itself the biggest inhibitor. But another key aspect that I think that's really becoming an obstacle is the internet is still somewhat unstable in some of those countries, and some of those countries that actually have governmental controls over those internet lines. And without that, I mean, the internet is the backbone of the infrastructure right now these days. So those are just a few, but they all create very complex contracting right now.
Okay, so we'll move on to our next topic. So our next topic is that processes should be fixed before they get outsourced. So the theory has long been that you wouldn't want to outsource a broken process, that you should fix it internally before you would look at sourcing. So
yeah, I think we need to flip the page as well. That slide. Go to the next slide.
Okay, so we're going to launch our poll on this one. So again, the question here is, should processes be fixed internally before they're sourced? Okay, we've got about 60% of the vote in. I do really appreciate the audience participation. You know, all of these polls we've had over 80% of the people vote. So people are not multitasking during this one, as often happens during webinars. So let me close this one out.
Except for me, I'm multitasking actually. Just kidding.
We'll share the results here. So this one splits 60-40. So we've got 60% is best practices, or 60% is BS, 40% is best practices. So I think everyone, again, a decade ago, maybe even 5-6 years ago, thought that this really was the way to go. That you don't want to give a provider a broken process, and I think the prevailing theory of transition then was really lift and shift. I think in today's market, again, the providers have grown in capabilities, and that as long as you've done your homework on what's available in the outsourcing market, and you've got your strategy and have a rigorous and detailed implementation plan, clients can buy fixing the process as part of their sourcing. The providers have the necessary people, they have the skill set needed in the people, so they've got Lean, they've got Six Sigma, they've got people with transition skills. Providers also have the tools and technologies. So, to make some of the changes necessarily in a transformation to fix some of the processes, they have those technologies in place and can immediately enhance the systems. And then the third area really is process expertise, depending what the process is. So, as with any theory, it doesn't hold true 100% of the time. But for most of the core processes that are sourced in the marketplace, providers have that process expertise and are able to document and design a process in collaboration with their clients that address some of the areas that would need to be fixed. So this one, I would agree with the BS call that the majority of the audience had on this one. Brady, did we get any audience questions in or comments on this one?
No questions so far.
Okay. Then we'll
move on. Okay.
Yep.
And by the way, as well, if you have questions about something we've already discussed, please ask them at any time. You don't necessarily have to wait till if that section is gone. You can still ask that question. So let's go to the next slide. The next one is a little bit more of the impact of what we see today with today's environment. So does war, or we'll call it any kind of conflict, and data security, are they the biggest geopolitical risk that's facing service providers and clients alike as well? That's the polling question. Is conflict or war and data security the biggest geopolitical risk facing providers and clients alike? So we can open up the polls.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of technical difficulties on the poll here for a second.
Oh, there you go. We're good. So, I mean, as people are putting their answers in, we're really talking about geopolitical risk. I mean, there's so many different things that could actually be geopolitical risk. It could be war, it could be infrastructure, it could be conflict, it could be politics, it could be financial, a number of different things that it could be related to there. All right. How many participants do we have? How many respondents do we have so far? The percentage?
About 70%, Michael. Let's go. Go ahead and close the poll.
All right. Wow. Okay. So an overwhelming majority of the people believe that by 70 to 30, that conflict is the biggest geopolitical risk. And this is going to be somewhat of a gray area because it's because you're talking about geopolitical risk and data security. My view on this is the number one risk really that is probably facing most providers as well as the clients is something that most people probably don't think of because we take it for granted, and that is the internet. And governments that have the capability to shut down the internet are really can create really enormous risk for service providers. As you look at the slide itself, you'll notice that in the red ovals, if we can get that slide back up, the red circles or the red ovals are the countries that right now have capabilities within their government to actually just shut down the internet. So China's government can shut down the internet. Russia's government can shut down the internet. Egypt's government, Turkey's government can shut down the internet. And with the internet being the backbone of the infrastructure for most of these service providers, I mean, you have so many things that are developed now with cloud computing and even with some of the automation that's driven off of these internet-based platforms. Any type of shutdown of the internet can really shut an organization, a service provider down. What I've seen in the past is even though there's conflict, as in Ukraine, for example, right now, or even Venezuela, even though you have conflict, and yes, to some degree, some cases, business continuity plans are being instituted, but for the most part, the work gets done still. The work gets done. People still go to work. The tasks are still followed through. There's maybe a slowness of operations, or maybe even a slowness in business development, but it doesn't really shut businesses down like shutting down the internet can actually shut the business down. Even right now, I mean, we know what's happening in Ukraine with what Russia's doing there, and still, most of the clients that I've talked to that actually have operations in Eastern Europe have seen little, if any, change to the operations that are taking place. What we have seen is a slowness in new business coming into those regions because of fear, but usually that's temporal. That's not something that actually goes on much longer than that. The countries in yellow there, which are the kind of the Western African countries, those are somewhat emerging countries in some respects. And it's not so much that the government, although some of them do, the government can shut the internet down. The real issue is that the internet just doesn't have the stability. It's almost the same for LATAM as well. Is that there's the instability in the internet connectivity to be able to ensure that there's continuous service there. So that's it. Any questions, comments about that? I kind of expected that one to kind of spark some questions.
Yeah, I've got one on data security. So So there was a question of don't you think data security is a bigger risk? And I guess there, my common point of view is that that's not really location specific.
Right.
Data security is an issue in the U.S. It's an issue in EMEA. It's an issue everywhere. It's not necessarily driven by where the outsourcing provider's located, although obviously there's potentially higher risk in certain countries than in the U.S. or EMEA.
Yep. No, actually, very good point, Dennis, and it's a great question. You're right. Data security is a huge risk right now, but it is data threats are ubiquitous right now. They're pretty much anywhere and everywhere. So, and data security itself is ever evolving, and just as much as threats are coming up, the mitigation of these threats are also ever evolving. But I agree, it's not country specific or local specific. Any other comments about? Go ahead, Brady.
Got a comment from Jason saying mixing war with data security is an odd combination in his mind. They're mutually exclusive. Shutting down the internet could be a form of data security and business continuity.
Actually, it makes a very good point. Yeah, I mean, with hacking and things of that nature, there could be a shutting down the internet. The distinction I would be making is that the hacking is more or less a criminal act that is being brought on to an organization, where the government shutting it down is a decision. But you make some very good points there, and there could be an argument that that data security would be a form of conflict there.
All right, let's move on.
Okay. So our next topic is around the use of ranking. So there's lots of different lists out there. AIAP has lists, and this is the first year they haven't ranked them in order. This one, Alpha. Gartner clearly has had lists of different providers and different types of services for years. Are rankings the best way to pick an outsourcing player? So is that really a best practice, or is that BS? So we can open the polls on that one. Wow, this one is looking to be very one-sided. I think we could close out and share it. So we had we again had 80% of the folks vote, and we've got virtually everyone saying this is BS. So that's somewhat our point of view too. I think that it's great to have a nice list to start with, but it's far from the best way to pick a partner. These lists is, I think of like online dating services. Everyone's got a nice picture, but that doesn't mean they really look like that. You really need to meet people face to face and talk with them to get sort of who is more culturally aligned and has a cultural fit with you, and then has operational fits and technology fits that fit what you're looking for. And often these polls are driven, or these rankings are driven by bigger. And, bigger isn't necessarily better, especially if you're a mid-sized company that's looking to source. So that's some factors to think about there. Also, often the rankings, the criteria change a lot over time. So, sometimes the people doing the rankings don't want to just put out the same list every year, because who's going to buy it? So you need to change it up a little, put in some new criteria, and that changes who's ranked as the top firms. So some thoughts there. I'm somewhat preaching to the choir here. If 91% think it's BS, but I think getting face to face with providers and advisors and talking to them face to face and understanding how their services fit your particular need, one, and then two, what team are you getting? Just because someone's got fantastic services doesn't necessarily mean that every team is the A team. So again, that's some of the importance of getting face to face. So that's pretty much this topic. We can move on to the next one.
So we're talking about outsourcing contracts now, and outsourcing contracts have reached a cookie cutter level of maturity with do-it-yourself type templates. Do we believe that outsourcing has actually reached a point where do-it-yourself type templates or cookie cutter type contracts can actually be used as opposed to more customized? Let's open up the polls. And some of you, as you're starting to fill out this particular poll, may wonder, is it related to specific horizontals, like is it more mature in IT than it would be F&A, or more mature in call center to HR? We're speaking in general here, but there could be a case made for very specific functions. All right, so this one looks like it's going about the way would expect that most people that are on this call recognize that this is BS, that there's it's not that level of maturity. Sure, there are some templates out there, and this to me is one of the more straightforward, almost softball type of give me ones for you guys. So there's no cookie cutter format that can be used for every contract. That I think, if you guys remember, there used to be a commercial on television. I think it was State Farm. I could be wrong, but there was a young lady that believed everything that came out on the internet. Just whatever somebody said on the internet, she believed. And she ended up dating this guy who claimed he was from France, who obviously didn't look like someone from France. He just blurted out, the bonjour with the southern accent type deal. But in any case, the point there is that everything's available on the internet just about right now. You can go out and you can find an MSA for an outsourcing contract. You can go to LegalZoom.com and find all kinds of documents out there that you can use. You probably can actually find some actual fully executed arrangements for some of the municipalities because of government disclosure requirements that are out there. Yes, you can get all that information, and yes, a lot of that is going to be applicable. There are some very market, widely recognized terms, some very market, widely recognized conditions that pretty much apply across the board. But as a general rule, you have to understand that these are fairly complex arrangements when you're talking about outsourcing or managed services. They're very complex in the sense that there's an impact to pricing. The pricing structures are very wide-ranging, everything from the basic FTE pricing to outcome-based pricing to transaction-based pricing to even some type of hybrid-based pricing. There are impacts for volume changes, and those impacts are even outside of the typical ARC or ROOK type of adjustments. There's even now, with the evolution of automation taking place, there's even some new language that's being added to contracts to address that as well. So all of these play a major factor, and these are going to continue to evolve. Quite frankly, I don't know that it would ever reach a point of maturity for multi-million-dollar contracts to get to a point where they're cookie cutter or they're very straightforward. So, any questions, comments?
Okay.
So far.
Okay. Well, we'll move on to the next topic. Our next topic is governance. Governance of outsourcing contracts has been around for a decade now. Have we reached a point that it's basically to the point where we could have the governance for dummies type of books? So that's really our question here. Has governance become easy, and can anyone do it well just from a governance for dummy type book? So if we can open the poll on this one. This may be the most one-sided poll we've seen yet. Yeah, I think we could close this one out.
Oh yeah. I expected this one to come out like this.
Yeah. So I think the audience agrees with what we're seeing in the market, which is that governance is not easy, and there's some stats that customers have bad governance, say 45% of IT outsourcing providers. So it's recognized as a problem both by customers, by providers, and by advisors. That's really been our biggest growth area, has been our vendor management services over the last few years, just because of the great demand and low supply for good governance leaders. So it's a challenge for companies as more and more companies outsource and more have multiple vendors and more know that there's a better way to do this, trying to ratchet up their services in-house to get to that next level, really is a challenge. The little graphic we have to the right here still shows that cost really is the number one driver of why people outsource. There's clearly other reasons in addition to it, but cost still is the biggest piece, and then some of the delivery issues come second. When you see lists of what's the biggest challenges in outsourcing relationships, it's measuring provider performance and then measuring and realizing that business case. So two of the biggest things that should be done by a governance and vendor management organizations are the areas that people identify as the biggest challenges in outsourcing. So
go to the next slide there as well, by the way, guys. Sorry.
Oh, that was
not there. Sorry. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I was saying, there's that the cost is still the number one reason people outsource, but the biggest challenges are around recognizing that cost savings, and then two, measuring the performance. Again, even outside of the outsourcing world in shared services, I think those same two challenges apply, of measuring the performance of shared services and then measuring the business case and cost realizations that were supposed to be triggered by shared services. So, I think it's an area again that we find ourselves talking to clients about all the time, and again a big growth area for us, and that we're now helping clients in more of a long-term way as opposed to just setting up the VMO. We are helping clients by providing some of those VMO services. Brady, any questions on the chat line or comments from folks?
No, I think everyone's decided with their votes.
Okay.
Great.
So then let's move on to our next topic.
The next one is BPaaS, Business Process as a Service. And this is really not so much best practice question as much as it is, I guess, market trend. But BPaaS is actually replacing legacy outsourcing or traditional outsourcing. Do we believe that? Polls are open, or should be open. Okay. And this one's close. This is very interesting, and this is one that would really be good if this were a kind of a roundtable discussion. This will really be a fun one to talk with the audience about, because there is a lot of belief that BPaaS has replaced legacy outsourcing, and the question really is, it's not so much is it going in that direction, possibly, but it is not replacing, at least in my view, the legacy outsourcing. I think we're seeing BPaaS growing a great deal, particularly in HR with products like Workday and Salesforce. Those are actually taking place, and then that is actually having a major impact in outsourcing. But we see those actually being coupled with the traditional outsourcing, not necessarily replacing it. It's just, from what we've seen, is far from that. It's really, and if you look at the article here, if we go back to the slide that has the article that this came from, it talks about the numbers or the percentages of BPaaS, and it says it's replacing the legacy outsourcing, yet when you look at the heat map here, there's nothing over, 22, 25% there. So I don't see how you can say it's actually replacing it. You can say it's enabling it. You can say it's advancing it. You can say it's actually being a tool or technology to help with that, but not necessarily a replacement. The other comment I would make about BPaaS is we're talking business process, and there are many business process functions that could be related to that. As you look at the chart here, you'll see HR, for example, has the highest penetration for BPaaS. So that's, like I said, a lot of that is the workday type of formats, where something like procurement is going to have a low end of that. So supply chain, strategic sourcing, there's just not going to be a lot of BPaaS that's going to replace that. There is going to be a lot of tool enablements. There's going to be a lot of accelerators out there. But to comment that BPaaS is a replacement right now, I think it's a little bit much. One final comment I'll make on this is not only do I call these advancements, but when we talk about BPaaS, there's also something that's taking place on the IT side with cloud enablement, cloud computing that's taking place. And we're seeing a significant change in the services that are being rendered by outsourced providers, particularly with respect to infrastructure. And that is having a major impact on what we would call legacy or traditional outsourcing, with the cloud computing having that. But to say it's replacing it on the BPaaS side and the business process side, I see as a little bit of hyperbole there. Questions, comments? Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to our next topic. So we've got shared service versus outsourcing is the key strategy decision for companies. So here it's really outsourcing versus shared services as two competing trends. So do we think that is a legitimate best practice, and that it's picking one or the other is your main strategy decision? So if we could open the polls on this one. Okay, we've got about 60% of the votes in so far, and it's fairly lopsided so far. Okay, do we want to close this one up, Brady? Thank you. Okay, so we showed 2/3 of the audience saying this is BS, and a third says it's best practice. In my mind, this was somewhat of a trick question in that, I would agree with the BS side of the house, in that it's really not competing. I think that the biggest trend that we see out there is people trying to figure out how to do both well. There are portions that make terrific sense to be done internally and should and need to be done internally by companies. And there's other portions where you could probably get better, faster, cheaper out in the marketplace. So figuring out what the right mix of both shared service and outsourcing is versus the old way of competing and fighting, saying no, I want this internal, versus other people saying no, you should outsource it. I think that has sort of run its course through most more mature organizations, and really today it's figuring out how to optimize both of these. That is the key strategy decision for companies, and that the delivery you see in most big companies is a integrated combination of the two. So any thoughts, comments on this one, Brady?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm sorry, quick comment I'll make on that one as well, Dennis, is that this is a major trend I'm seeing as well in the marketplace about shared services and outsourcing. We're seeing more and more clients, and you Dennis, you alluded to this earlier, that more and more clients are looking at the end-to-end process, not just a specific accounts payable, not even just a specific procure to pay. They're looking at the full SG&A organization, and they're trying to develop a global delivery model that encompasses both the shared services and the outsourcing aspect. So when we go to market, I've often done shared services and outsourcing at the same time in kind of the same transaction. So,
yep.
All right. So let's go to the last topic I believe of the day. It's going to be one that's fairly relevant for the day, and that is robotics. Robotics has arrived in BPO. Now, there could be debate about what we mean by arrived, but for the sake of this discussion, let's just say arrived means that it's here. It's not only here to stay, but it's fairly penetrated. Open the polls up.
It's been interesting to sort of watch the numbers. On this one, it's been going back and forth of who's in the lead as people vote.
This is also another one that is also somewhat controversial, and a lot of it goes back to, like I said, how do you interpret the word arrive? So we're almost evenly split. We're 59% say it's BS and 41% say it's best practice. I tend to fall on the side that says it's BS for the moment. Now, I want to clarify that statement. First of all, I am a huge proponent of technological advances. I love the whole RPA piece. I love autonomics and robotics. I think there's definitely a strong future for that. In fact, there's a blog that I've written about that as well. But I just don't think it has arrived yet. And let's level set what we're talking about when we say robotics or RPA. There's RPA or robotics that we're talking about is not cognitive computing. It's not even advanced AI type of computing. It's really taking your everyday task that a normal human being would do and doing that exponentially faster than the human being would have done it. There's no thinking, there's no interpretation. It's strictly doing that task when we talk about RPA and robotics here. And right now, from what I've seen, there are some firms out there, some outsourcing firms, some service providers that are really making big headway in this space. They've got a lot of clients. They've been able to do this not only as a pilot, but in production. They've really done a good job of that. And I think that's going to grow more and more. But at the moment, the issue, I think, is that the general public, when you talk about companies, when you talk about businesses, whether they're Fortune 500 companies or smaller companies with a total revenue of $400 or $500 million, there's still not enough awareness and education about robotics and what that represents. I mean, even now, when I talk to clients about robotics, they envision this rosy type contraption from the Jetsons that's going around and actually doing the work. They don't quite understand it. It's a virtual tool that's mimicking the keystrokes of a human being. So, is it going to be big? I believe so. It's just not there at the moment. There's also the concept of the fact that it's also going to be very horizontal focused as well. I mean, you can say it's there in certain places. I think we're seeing more of it in some of the financial services industry than we are in other places. So there may be certain verticals that it's related to, but there may be some certain horizontals as well. You may see more of it in accounts payable or in procure-to-pay functions than you would certain other places. How do you determine if it's right for you, if robotics is right for you, or if RPA is right for you? Really, there's a number of factors. There isn't a specific industry or a specific function that's best suited for RPA. Really, what you need is it's really best suited for something that has general rules for adoption and something that has kind of a rules-based manual process with a digital output or digital input, some type of digital input. So the information that comes into the robotics engine has got to be fairly, not only digital, but it's got to be somewhat standard. And the processes have to be fairly manual, of course, as well to make it work. But there's a lot to be done still in this space. I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I'm very pleased to hear about some of the providers that are doing great things in this space. And to a degree, this may become a bit of a cannibalistic type activity for some providers as well.
Yeah, I think this is one that if we have the same seminar in 2 years, this is one where we will flip from this being, false to true. So I think it's certainly coming. So, if the question was, will robotics arrive? I think everyone would say yes. I'm seeing lots of great demos, and I'm seeing it live in places now. So, but again, we're talking 5%, 10% of what's
right
to come. So I don't think it's here yet. But for a process that really didn't exist 3 years ago, 4 years ago, again, I'm not talking screen scraping and workflow and OCR. I'm talking true robotics. I think it's made fantastic leaps. I've seen some demos of things like voice translations where someone could call up speaking Chinese, and within 3 seconds it's translated to English. Someone else could call up speaking Portuguese, and in 3 seconds it's translated to English. I mean, that will change the whole call center world of the future. I've seen it in place in the airline industry. Some things they're doing there. And I'm sure it's coming for just core processes like accounts payable. I really think that within a certain number of years, AP clerks are going to be sort of like bank tellers were a decade ago.
Yeah.
It's just going to change. And again, this is like such a hot area that for Allsbridge, we now have a separate line of service that does nothing but track this. We've got points of view on what every provider is doing in robotics, what their capabilities are. We've got points of view on the different players, your Blue Prism and Automate Anywhere and all of those types of folks. And it's in every RFP we do now, because you've really got to think about that as you do sourcing, that whatever your model is today, if it's FTE based or if it's outcome based or if it's transaction based, the price point it will change on those outcome transaction based ones. And then on FTE, I mean, you've got to have a whole new model to take into account the robotics world. So so something to keep in mind there, some thoughts.
Yeah, I think what you'll see in the future, as you mentioned, and Dennis, is a couple of years from now this will change, but also you'll see the pricing structures change. I mean, you talk about F&A right now. F&A is still a largely FTE-based pricing, but as robotics begins to penetrate this market more and more, that pricing structure is going to switch to an outcome-based type model, because that's what works best with robotics and RPA.
Yeah, Mike,
questions, comments?
I think Bert would agree with you. He says that at his company, it's not best practice yet. He's got limited applications are being employed, but there are many projects under review still.
Yeah. If you're not piloting something yet, you're probably starting to get behind the curve. So your provider should be piloting something for you if you've already outsourced, or you should be looking at something internally. But it's coming soon. So
looks like we're at the top of the hour.
Yep. Okay. Well, I personally want to thank everybody for attending. I think it was a very good session, and I hope everybody got something out of this. Some of it you may have known, and some of it hopefully was something that you were able to pick up on. I appreciate everyone's attendance.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. I'm shocked at the high percentage of people who actually participated in every poll. So kudos to everyone for paying attention through this one. Brady, any closing comments?
I just wanted to thank everybody else for not only showing up but also participating. Look for an email here in the next day or two with a link to the recording as well as the slides that we used today. And I hope everybody has a great afternoon. Thank you.